The morning sun cast long shadows across the ornate corridors of Buckingham Palace as King Charles III walked slowly toward his private study, his footsteps echoing against the marble floors. In his weathered hands, he carried a leather-bound document that had arrived just hours earlier from the royal solicitors. The weight of the envelope seemed to grow heavier with each step, not because of its physical mass, but because of the profound implications it contained. Charles had been king for over 2 years now, yet moments like these still felt surreal. The transition from heir apparent to sovereign had been smoother than many had predicted, but it came with responsibilities that sometimes felt overwhelming. Today was one of those days. The document he carried contained his late mother's final codicil to her will, a secret addendum that had only recently been discovered during a routine review of Queen Elizabeth II's personal effects. As he settled into his favorite armchair beside the window overlooking the palace gardens, Charles broke the wax seal with trembling fingers. The familiar sight of his mother's careful handwriting brought tears to his eyes. Even in death, she continued to guide and influence the monarchy she had served so faithfully for over 70 years. The codicil was dated just 3 months before her passing, written in her own hand during what would be her final summer at Balmoral. The document began with her characteristic formality, but as Charles read on, he could sense the deep emotion and careful consideration behind every word. Queen Elizabeth had spent her final months reviewing the roles and responsibilities of the royal family, particularly those of Camilla, who had only recently been granted the title of Queen Consort. The late Queen's words revealed a complex mixture of acceptance, wisdom, and, perhaps most surprisingly, genuine affection for the woman who had become such an important part of Charles's life. Charles remembered the long journey that had brought them to this point. His relationship with Camilla had been scrutinized, criticized, and eventually accepted by both the public and the royal family. His mother's initial reservations had been well documented, but over the years, she had witnessed Camilla's dedication to duty and her unwavering support for Charles. The Queen had seen how Camilla had embraced royal responsibilities with grace and dignity, never seeking the spotlight, but always present when needed. The codicil outlined specific concerns about the future of the monarchy in a rapidly changing world. Queen Elizabeth had recognized that the institution needed to evolve while maintaining its core values and traditions. She had observed how public opinion about the royal family continued to shift, particularly among younger generations who questioned the relevance of monarchy in modern society. Her solution was both practical and forward-thinking, focusing on how each member of the royal family could best serve the nation while remaining true to their individual strengths. As Charles continued reading, he discovered that his mother had given considerable thought to Camilla's role as Queen Consort. The codicil revealed that Queen Elizabeth had been impressed by Camilla's work with various charities, particularly her advocacy for literacy, domestic violence awareness, and support for military families. However, the late Queen had also identified areas where changes might be beneficial, not as criticism, but as opportunities for the monarchy to better connect with the people it served. The document detailed specific recommendations for adjusting Camilla's royal patronages and public duties. Queen Elizabeth suggested that some of the more traditional ceremonial roles might be redistributed to allow Camilla to focus on causes that genuinely resonated with her personal experiences and passions. The late Queen had recognized that authenticity was becoming increasingly important in public life, and she believed that Camilla's effectiveness would be enhanced by allowing her to work in areas where her personal investment was most evident. Charles paused in his reading, remembering countless conversations he had shared with his mother about the challenges facing the modern monarchy. She had always emphasized the importance of relevance and connection with ordinary people. The Queen had understood that respect for the institution could not be taken for granted and needed to be earned through meaningful service and genuine engagement with contemporary issues. The Codicil also addressed the delicate balance between supporting established traditions and embracing necessary change. Queen Elizabeth acknowledged that some adjustments to Camilla's role might generate controversy, particularly among those who remained attached to memories of Diana, Princess of Wales. However, the late Queen expressed her belief that the monarchy's survival depended on its ability to evolve thoughtfully while honoring its history and the memory of those who had served before. Charles found himself deeply moved by his mother's words about Camilla's character and commitment. The Queen had written about observing Camilla's quiet dedication during private family moments, her support during difficult times, and her ability to bring joy and stability to Charles's life. The Codicil revealed that Queen Elizabeth had come to view Camilla not just as Charles's wife, but as a valuable member of the royal family who deserved recognition for her contributions. The recommendations contained in the document were specific and well-reasoned. Queen Elizabeth suggested that Camilla might step back from certain ceremonial duties that had traditionally been associated with the queen consort role, particularly those involving military honors and state functions where her presence might overshadow the primary purpose of the event. Instead, the late Queen proposed that Camilla focus on domestic issues, community outreach, and causes that allowed her to use her life experiences in service of others. Charles realized that implementing these changes would require careful consideration and diplomatic communication. The royal household staff, government officials, and the public would need to understand the reasoning behind any modifications to established protocols. He knew that his mother's guidance was invaluable, but the responsibility for making these decisions ultimately rested with him as the reigning monarch. The afternoon light was beginning to fade as Charles finished reading the Codicil for the first time. He sat in contemplation, absorbing the full implications of his mother's final wishes. The document represented not just practical recommendations, but a profound expression of love and concern for both Charles and Camilla, as well as for the future of the monarchy they would lead together. As he prepared to share this discovery with Camilla, Charles felt a mixture of emotions. There was sadness at this final communication from his beloved mother, but also gratitude for her continued guidance and wisdom. He knew that the changes she had recommended would not be easy to implement, but he trusted her judgment completely. Queen Elizabeth had devoted her life to understanding what the monarchy needed to survive and thrive, and her final words on the subject deserve serious consideration. Charles carefully folded the Codicil and placed it in his personal safe, knowing that tomorrow would bring the challenging task of discussing its contents with Camilla and beginning the process of implementing the recommended changes. The weight of responsibility felt heavy on his shoulders, but he drew comfort from knowing that his mother's wisdom would continue to guide them through the difficult decisions that lay ahead. The following morning brought an unusually quiet atmosphere to Clarence's house as Camilla went about her usual routine, unaware of the momentous conversation that awaited her. She had spent the early hours reviewing her schedule with her private secretary, confirming appointments for the upcoming week that included visits to literacy programs, a reception for domestic violence survivors, and a ceremony honoring military families. These engagements had become the cornerstone of her public life, causes that spoke to her heart and allowed her to make a genuine difference in people's lives. Charles had requested a private breakfast meeting, which was not unusual, given their busy schedules often meant they needed to coordinate their royal duties. However, Camilla sensed something different in her husband's demeanor when he entered the morning room. His expression carried a weight that she had learned to recognize over their many years together, a look that appeared when he was grappling with significant decisions that would affect both their personal lives and their public roles. As they sat together at the small table overlooking the garden, Charles gently placed the leather document beside his coffee cup. Camilla's eyes immediately focused on the familiar royal seal and the aged appearance of the papers. Without saying a word, she understood that this was something of great importance, likely connected to Queen Elizabeth's legacy. The silence stretched between them as Charles searched for the right words to begin this delicate conversation. "My mother left us some final guidance," Charles said softly, his voice carrying the emotion he had been holding since discovering the Codicil. "This was found among her most private papers, written in her final months. It concerns your role as queen consort and her thoughts about how we might better serve the people while honoring the institution she devoted her life to preserving. Camilla felt her breath catch in her throat. Even after all these years, the thought of Queen Elizabeth's opinion still mattered deeply to her. The journey from being seen as an obstacle to the monarchy to becoming an accepted member of the royal family had been long and sometimes painful. She had worked tirelessly to prove herself worthy of the trust placed in her, always conscious of the skepticism and criticism that had followed her path to this position. As Charles began to read selected passages from the Codicil, Camilla listened with growing emotion. The late Queen's words revealed a deep understanding of the challenges Camilla had faced and an appreciation for the dignity with which she had handled them. Queen Elizabeth had written about observing Camilla's growth into her royal role, noting her genuine connection with the causes she supported and her ability to bring comfort to those who were struggling with their own difficulties. The specific recommendations outlined in the document were both surprising and thoughtful. Queen Elizabeth suggested that Camilla step back from certain state ceremonial functions where protocol dictated formal participation, but where her presence might not add meaningful value. Instead, the late Queen envisioned Camilla taking on expanded roles in areas where her personal experiences and natural empathy could have the greatest impact. Camilla found herself particularly moved by Queen Elizabeth's recognition of her work with domestic violence survivors. The Codicil acknowledged that Camilla's own life experiences, while never explicitly discussed in public, had given her unique insights into situations where women needed support and understanding. The late Queen suggested that this could become a more prominent part of Camilla's royal duties, allowing her to use her platform to address issues that were often hidden from public view. The recommendations also included a proposal for Camilla to develop closer relationships with local community organizations across the United Kingdom. Queen Elizabeth had observed that Camilla seemed most comfortable and effective in smaller, more intimate settings where she could engage directly with individuals rather than addressing large formal gatherings. The Codicil suggested that this natural inclination could be channeled into a more focused approach to royal engagements. As they discussed the implications of these suggestions, both Charles and Camilla recognized that implementing changes would require delicate handling. The British public had gradually accepted Camilla's role as queen consort, but any modifications to established protocols needed to be explained carefully to avoid misunderstanding or criticism. They understood that some people might interpret changes as a diminishment of Camilla's importance, while others might see them as long overdue recognition of her unique strengths. Charles shared his mother's thoughts about the importance of authenticity in modern royal service. Queen Elizabeth had recognized that the monarchy's connection with the people depended increasingly on genuine engagement rather than mere ceremonial presence. The Codicil emphasized that Camilla's effectiveness came from her ability to relate to ordinary experiences and struggles, a quality that should be enhanced rather than constrained by traditional expectations. The conversation turned to practical considerations about how to communicate these changes to the royal household staff, government officials, and the media. Both Charles and Camilla understood that any adjustments to royal protocols would be scrutinized intensely, with commentators and critics eager to find deeper meanings in every decision. They needed to present the changes as positive developments that would enhance Camilla's ability to serve effectively rather than as corrections to previous arrangements. Camilla expressed her deep gratitude for Queen Elizabeth's thoughtful consideration of her role and future. She admitted that she had sometimes felt constrained by certain ceremonial obligations that seemed to emphasize form over substance. The opportunity to focus more intensively on causes that genuinely resonated with her personal values felt like a gift, even as it came with the sadness of being the late Queen's final guidance. They spent considerable time discussing the timing of implementing these changes. Charles believed that gradual modifications would be less likely to generate controversy than sudden dramatic shifts in Camilla's public schedule. They agreed to begin with small adjustments that would allow them to gauge public reaction before proceeding with more significant changes to established protocols. The emotional weight of the conversation was apparent to both of them. This was not simply about administrative adjustments to royal duties, but about honoring Queen Elizabeth's final wishes while ensuring that Camilla could serve most effectively in her role as queen consort. They recognized that the late queen's recommendations represented her deep love for both of them and her continued concern for the monarchy's future success. As their breakfast meeting concluded, Charles and Camilla felt a renewed sense of purpose and direction. The Codicil had provided them with a roadmap for moving forward that honored tradition while embracing necessary evolution. They understood that implementing Queen Elizabeth's recommendations would require courage, patience, and careful communication, but they were united in their commitment to fulfilling her final wishes. The day ahead would bring meetings with senior palace staff to begin the delicate process of planning these changes. Both Charles and Camilla felt the weight of responsibility, knowing that their decisions would be scrutinized by history as well as by contemporary observers. However, they also felt supported by Queen Elizabeth's wisdom and guidance, confident that her recommendations would ultimately strengthen both Camilla's effectiveness and the monarchy's connection with the people it served. As Camilla prepared for her scheduled engagements, she carried with her a new understanding of her role and future responsibilities. The late Queen's words had given her permission to embrace more fully the aspects of royal service that brought her the greatest satisfaction and where she could make the most meaningful difference. The challenge now would be implementing these changes while maintaining the dignity and respect that Queen Elizabeth had worked so hard to restore to the monarchy. The weeks following the discovery of Queen Elizabeth's codicil brought a flurry of carefully orchestrated meetings within the highest levels of the royal household. Charles had convened his most trusted advisors, including the private secretary, the Lord Chamberlain, and senior members of the communications team, to discuss the sensitive task of implementing his mother's final recommendations. The atmosphere in these meetings was one of profound respect for the late Queen's wisdom, combined with the practical challenges of modernizing centuries-old protocols without appearing to diminish established traditions. Sir Clive Alderton, Charles's private secretary, had initially expressed concerns about public perception. The British media and royal commentators were notoriously quick to interpret any changes as signs of internal conflict or dissatisfaction within the royal family. He worried that modifications to Camilla's role might be misunderstood as evidence that she had been found lacking in her ceremonial duties or that there were tensions between the king and queen consort that required resolution through role adjustments. However, as the group studied Queen Elizabeth's detailed reasoning in the codicil, they began to appreciate the sophisticated thinking behind her recommendations. The late Queen had clearly spent considerable time observing Camilla's public engagements and had identified patterns that suggested where her strengths could be best utilized. Her suggestions were not based on any perceived weaknesses, but rather on a deep understanding of how to maximize effectiveness in royal service. The communication strategy required delicate handling. The palace's media team worked on crafting messages that would emphasize the positive aspects of the changes while acknowledging the continuing evolution of the monarchy to meet contemporary needs. They wanted to present the modifications as evidence of the royal family's responsiveness to changing times rather than as corrections to previous arrangements. Meanwhile, Camilla had begun the emotional process of reviewing her current commitments to determine which ones aligned most closely with Queen Elizabeth's vision for her future role. Some of the ceremonial duties that would be modified had become familiar parts of her routine, and stepping back from them felt both liberating and somewhat melancholy. She had worked hard to master the complex protocols associated with state functions, and there was a sense of loss in acknowledging that these skills might no longer be her primary focus. The process of consultation with various organizations and charities that worked with Camilla revealed interesting insights about her impact and effectiveness. Many of the leaders from literacy programs, domestic violence support services, and military family organizations spoke passionately about Camilla's genuine engagement with their work. They described her ability to connect with individuals who were struggling, her willingness to listen without judgment, and her practical approach to understanding complex social problems. These conversations reinforced Queen Elizabeth's observations about where Camilla's natural talents were most evident. The feedback from grassroots organizations consistently highlighted her effectiveness in smaller, more personal settings where she could engage directly with the people being served by various programs. This stood in contrast to larger ceremonial events where her role was more symbolic than interactive. Charles found himself reflecting deeply on his mother's broader vision for the monarchy during this period. The Codicil represented more than specific recommendations about Camilla's role. It embodied Queen Elizabeth's understanding that the institution needed to remain relevant and connected to ordinary people's lives. She had recognized that effectiveness in royal service was increasingly measured by meaningful impact rather than mere ceremonial presence. The practical challenges of implementing changes became apparent as they worked through the details. Certain state functions had established protocols that had remained unchanged for decades, and modifying Camilla's participation required careful coordination with government officials and foreign dignitaries who were accustomed to specific arrangements. The palace staff needed to ensure that any changes would not be interpreted as diplomatic signals or signs of political shifts. One particularly complex area involved Camilla's role in military ceremonies and honors. Queen Elizabeth had suggested that these duties might be better handled by other members of the royal family who had direct military experience or stronger historical connections to specific regiments and services. This recommendation required sensitive discussions with military leadership to ensure that the changes would be understood as organizational improvements rather than any reflection on Camilla's respect for military service. The international implications also required consideration. As queen consort, Camilla played important roles during state visits and diplomatic functions. Queen Elizabeth's recommendations suggested focusing these responsibilities on areas where Camilla's personal interests and expertise could contribute most meaningfully to diplomatic relationships, particularly in areas related to education, women's issues, and community development. Family discussions about the changes brought their own emotional complexity. William and Catherine, as future king and queen consort, were deeply interested in understanding the reasoning behind the modifications since they would eventually face similar decisions about their own roles. The conversations provided opportunities to discuss broader questions about how the monarchy could continue to evolve while maintaining its core purposes and values. Harry's absence from these family discussions was painfully apparent to everyone involved. Charles knew that his younger son would have valuable insights about public perception and the importance of authenticity in royal service, but the ongoing tensions within the family made such conversations impossible. This added another layer of sadness to the process of implementing his mother's final guidance. The media speculation about the reasons for changes in Camilla's schedule began before any official announcements were made. Royal correspondents noticed subtle shifts in the types of events she was attending and began asking questions about whether these represented temporary adjustments or permanent changes to her role. The palace communications team worked carefully to provide information that satisfied media curiosity without revealing the full details of Queen Elizabeth's codicil. Public reaction to the initial changes was mixed, but generally positive. Many people appreciated seeing Camilla focus more intensively on causes that seemed to align with her personal experiences and interests. The increased emphasis on domestic violence awareness and literacy programs resonated particularly well with younger audiences who valued authentic engagement over traditional ceremonial roles. Some traditional monarchists expressed concerns about any modifications to established protocols, arguing that consistency and continuity were essential elements of royal service. However, these voices were balanced by others who saw the changes as evidence that the royal family was listening to contemporary needs and adapting thoughtfully to serve more effectively. As the implementation process continued, both Charles and Camilla felt increasingly confident that they were honoring Queen Elizabeth's vision while also creating opportunities for more meaningful and effective royal service. The late Queen's wisdom was proving itself through the positive responses they were receiving from organizations and individuals who worked closely with Camilla in her modified role. The emotional journey of this transformation had brought Charles and Camilla closer together as they navigated the complex process of change while honoring tradition. They had learned to appreciate Queen Elizabeth's final gift of guidance and were finding ways to implement her recommendations that enhanced both Camilla's personal satisfaction and her effectiveness as queen consort. 6 months after the discovery of Queen Elizabeth's Codicil, the transformation of Camilla's royal role had begun to show remarkable results that exceeded even Charles's optimistic expectations. The changes, implemented gradually and with careful attention to public communication, had created new opportunities for meaningful engagement that seemed to energize both Camilla and the community she served. The late Queen's vision was proving to be not just practical guidance, but inspired understanding of how modern royal service could achieve maximum impact. The most visible success had come through Camilla's expanded work with domestic violence survivors and their families. By stepping back from certain ceremonial obligations, she had been able to dedicate more time to visiting shelters, supporting counseling programs, and working directly with organizations that provided practical assistance to women escaping dangerous situations. These engagements had revealed a side of Camilla that the public had rarely seen before, showcasing her ability to provide comfort and hope to people facing their darkest moments. During one particularly moving visit to a shelter in Manchester, Camilla had spent nearly 3 hours talking individually with residents about their experiences and future plans. The shelter's director later described her approach as uniquely effective, noting that Camilla's own life experiences seemed to give her special insight into situations where women had faced difficult choices and life transitions. The authenticity of her engagement was apparent to everyone present, and word of her genuine concern spread throughout the network of organizations working on these issues. The literacy programs that had become a central focus of Camilla's modified role were also flourishing under her increased attention. She had developed innovative approaches to promoting reading that went beyond traditional royal patronage, including partnerships with local libraries, schools, and community centers to create programs that address specific needs in different communities. Her personal passion for books and reading was infectious, inspiring volunteers and participants alike to embrace literacy as a pathway to personal empowerment. Charles observed these developments with growing pride and satisfaction, recognizing that his mother's recommendations had unlocked Camilla's potential in ways that traditional royal protocols had not allowed. The queen consort was more confident and effective than she had ever been in her public role, and this transformation was having positive effects that extended far beyond her official duties into their personal relationship and family life. The challenges of implementing the changes had not been insignificant, but they had been managed successfully through careful planning and transparent communication. Some ceremonial duties have been redistributed to other members of the royal family, creating opportunities for William, Catherine, and other royals to take on expanded responsibilities that prepared them for their future roles. This had the additional benefit of demonstrating the collaborative nature of modern royal service, while honoring the traditions that remained important to the monarchy's identity. International reactions to the changes have been largely positive, with many foreign dignitaries and organizations expressing appreciation for Camilla's more focused approach to her royal responsibilities. During recent state visits, her engagement with issues related to women's empowerment and education had created meaningful connections with international partners that enhanced Britain's diplomatic relationships in subtle but important ways. The media coverage of Camilla's transformed role had evolved from initial skepticism to genuine admiration for her effectiveness and authenticity. Royal correspondents who had once focused primarily on protocol and tradition began writing stories about the real-world impact of her work, highlighting specific individuals and communities that had benefited from her increased focus and attention. This shift in coverage reflected a broader change in public perception that valued substance over ceremony. One particularly significant moment had come during a visit to a literacy program in Edinburgh, where Camilla met with a group of adult learners who were working to improve their reading skills. One participant, a woman in her 50s who had struggled with reading her entire life, spoke tearfully about how the program had changed her ability to help her grandchildren with their homework. The genuine emotion of this encounter, captured by photographers and widely shared on social media, seemed to crystallize public understanding of why Queen Elizabeth had recommended these changes to Camilla's role. The ripple effects of the transformation extended beyond Camilla's individual impact to influence broader conversations about the purpose and effectiveness of modern monarchy. The success of her focused approach had sparked discussions among royal watchers and constitutional experts about how other members of the royal family might similarly optimize their roles to achieve maximum benefit for the causes and communities they served. Charles had begun incorporating some of the principles behind his mother's recommendations into his own approach to royal duties, looking for ways to enhance authenticity and meaningful engagement in his role as king. The Codicil had provided not just specific guidance about Camilla's role, but broader insights about how the monarchy could continue to evolve while maintaining its essential character and values. Family relationships had also been strengthened through the process of implementing these changes. William and Catherine had been actively involved in taking on some of the ceremonial duties that Camilla had stepped back from, and these new responsibilities had provided valuable experience for their future roles while demonstrating their commitment to supporting the monarch and queen consort. The collaborative approach had reinforced the sense of unity and shared purpose within the working royal family. As Charles reflected on the journey from discovering his mother's codicil to seeing its recommendations successfully implemented, he felt profound gratitude for her continued guidance and wisdom. The changes had honored her memory, while creating new opportunities for effective service that neither he nor Camilla could have envisioned on their own. Queen Elizabeth's understanding of human nature, public service, and institutional adaptation had proved once again to be remarkably prescient. The personal satisfaction that Camilla derived from her refocused role was evident to everyone who worked with her. She approached her engagements with renewed energy and enthusiasm, secure in the knowledge that she was making a genuine difference in areas where her contributions were most valued and effective. The confidence that came from working in alignment with her natural strengths had transformed not just her public effectiveness, but her personal sense of fulfillment and purpose. Looking toward the future, Charles and Camilla felt optimistic about their ability to continue serving effectively while honoring both tradition and the need for thoughtful evolution. Queen Elizabeth's final guidance had provided them with a framework for making difficult decisions that balanced respect for established protocols with responsiveness to contemporary needs and opportunities. The success of implementing the Codicil's recommendations had also provided a model for future adaptations that might be needed as circumstances continued to change. The royal family had demonstrated that meaningful evolution was possible without abandoning core values or essential traditions, a lesson that would serve them well in facing whatever challenges and opportunities lay ahead. As evening settled over Buckingham Palace, Charles stood once again in his study, looking out over the gardens where he had first contemplated his mother's final words of guidance. The leather-bound document now rested in its place of honor, but its influence had spread far beyond those original pages to touch the lives of countless individuals and communities across the United Kingdom and beyond. Queen Elizabeth's wisdom lived on through the positive changes that continued to unfold, a lasting testament to her understanding of service, leadership, and love.